Hello, friends. In this episode, we had an extremely interesting conversation, the second one, with Rabbi Michoel Seligson, should be gesund. And I believe this is something that many are not aware of, that for most of the Rebbe's Nesius, the sefer of Hayom Yom was a closed book. And really, it only became common practice to start reading it after davening every day in the late 80s, early 90s. This is a relatively new thing. And I believe that, as you'll hear in this conversation, Rabbi Michoel Seligson was the one to really begin to give us a window into the real depths of Hayom Yom that most Chassidim did not appreciate. Just like the Sefer HaMinhagim, we came to the Haggadah. We came to realize already early on that every single letter and nuance was so meduyik. Rabbi Seligson were able to open up the window of how much depth there is in the Hayom Yom. Listen to this tremendous conversation as we prepare for Yom HaGadol HaKadosh VaHanoida Gimel Tammuz, and come to appreciate what the gift that Rebbe gave us in the Hayom Yom.
Welcome everyone to the podcast HalachaU. The purpose of this podcast is to bridge the gap between Rabbanim and Mashpim and the Anash community. I am doing this with my friend Rebbe Bassman, who is the Menahel of several Halacha and Chassidim projects.
Thank you, Levi. Baruch Hashem, is a zchus that I have the exposure to many prestigious Rabbonim and Mashpim who are often not given a proper platform. This podcast, HalachaU, will give a voice to these Rabbonim and Mashpim to share their thinking, their hashkafa, Chassidus, a deep dive into their backstory to help uplift the entire community.
Please consider subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing, because that helps the algorithm bring it to more people, which changes lives and brings Mashiach.
Okay, Agresin Yashikayach a second time. Rabbi Seligson for joining us on the HalachaU podcast. The feedback from the previous Farbrengen and conversation was very strong, and the Chevra had a strong mavukish to hear, what's beyond the sefer, what's going a little deeper beyond the going from the chevtza to the gavra of the svarim and the background and the backstory to gain a deeper appreciation for what goes on. Sometimes someone could spend a lifetime working on something and he assumes everyone knows what's going on, but generally you don't want to take anything. There's so much static in this world, so that to shed some light on some extremely monumental projects. And actually, I had initially in our last conversation wanted to start with this. For some reason, Bashkacha Pratis, we started talking about the Mafteach, but the Hayom Yom, which I discovered, maybe 5-10 years ago, Rabbi Seligson perhaps did to the Hayom Yom, discovered in the Hayom Yom what perhaps Rav Zevin Olav Shalom discovered for us in the Rebbe's Haggadah, that there's so many layers of. He kind of opened up the land. He opened up the world of the Haggadah to realize that every comma and period and ha'ara in the Haggadah Shel Pesach is so nuanced. So I perhaps for decades and decades, Chassidim just took the Hayom Yom as this little nice, likut of sichas of the Frierdiker Rebbe. But Rabbi Seligson discovered, and we'd love to hear more about how that discovery came about, that the Hayom Yom as well is layered with multi levels of interpretation, and I assume maybe we're just touching the surface with three svarim so far on that I have in front of me. but I think are still out of print at this point. But you can get them on the Chochma, and I borrowed this from my shver. Like close to 1,000 pages so far of pirushim in the Haggadah. So Yashikayach for agreeing to talk about this. Before we get into
you're welcome.
Before we get into your specific editions, let's talk a little bit about the Hayom Yom itself. I was asking on my WhatsApp status that I'm speaking with Rabbi Seligson today. So one of the questions the Chevra had were, is the Hayom Yom, was there initially pushback that like here you have these vertelach and Lubavitch is not a Chassidus of vertelach? Is this like is this a Chabadske sefer?
The question is an interesting question. The question is an interesting question because Chabad is generally elaborating, delving into something in great length. I mean, this is what Chabad is. But it seems like it was a certain time during World War II, and this is when the Frierdiker Rebbe chose to initiate such a calendar, which should consist, as he mentions, stories, minhagim, kurze vertelach, short pisgomim, short quotes, and this was pushed to inspire Yidden. I mean, this was something which was not only for Chassidim, but for Yidden in general. The Frierdiker Rebbe initiated it, in fact, right in the beginning of the war. It was in 1940. It was Pesach time, Achron Pesach time. And he said that there is a need to compile such a collection, a compilation, which should consist of all these aspects, which is the quote, the shiurim of the day, stories, menhagim, which means he was envisioning then the Hayom Yom. And the Frierdiker Rebbe says that one who needs to compile it is the candidate, one who has a broad mind, deep mind, mesuder, organized. And an interesting point the Frierdiker Rebbe makes, which sometimes people don't realize, as he continues, he says, generally, every project that he took upon himself, the Eibishter helped some time or another that it came through. And the Frierdiker Rebbe says that everything that he took upon himself, and he gave to parnosa of Yidden. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says that therefore he hopes, he figures with the vados that the right person will come would step up and will accomplish it.
Interesting. So initially, the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't know who was going to be the author or the malakit.
He did not. He did not mention. He said that the one that's fit for this is basically someone who has all these qualities. And in Europe, what I heard later, I would have to look it up in documentation, that the Rebbe asked for the Sicha. The Rebbe asked for Chassidim, they should send him the Sicha from Achron Pesach, I think it was. And it's printed in the Sefer Sichas Tafshin. It was Tafshin Gimel, which is 2.5 years later, when the Rebbe got a formal letter from the previous Rebbe, although the Rebbe was downstairs in 770, the first floor, and the Frierdiker Rebbe lived on the second floor, but everything went very formal between them. And the Rebbe received a letter on the 20th of Kislev. You should compile a luach with these details, with these aspects.
Interesting.
That he
the Frierdiker Rebbe then asked him to do it.
The Hayom Yom actually came out before Pesach. He's writing to the Rebbe the letter the 20th of Kislev. It is in the Igris Kedesh, volume 7, and the Rebbe began working on it, and it was published Nisan time. So a lot of people don't realize that the Luach was not available till Nisan time, till right before Pesach. So this is a work of Teves, Shvat, Oder, Nisan, up to 5 months when it was finally published, and the Rebbe himself was selling it in 770 for 40 cents.
What do you mean the Rebbe was selling it?
The Luach worked on it in a few months.
What does it mean the Rebbe was selling it? He was
literally going around in 77, going around with a bunch of keftzim. The Rebbe wrote that very special letter on the 28th of Nisan to someone who is very into literature, a Yiddishist, and he said, "You surely have received the Hayom Yom, which is a calendar and written in published in a small format, teaching a chassid that he should be modest in his own eyes, but it is filled with the most precious stones and pearls that can be collected together." And the Friedrich Rebbe continues that the Eibishter has assisted. My son-in-law mentions the Rebbe by the name with the title Hagoen. Kol echad b'nei Yisrael chosid chelik mizmani chelik machayev. The lashon was hachosid. Originally it says hachosid, so the Rebbe wrote b'nei Yisrael hachosid, ben Yisrael hachosid.
How do you interpret
interesting
that?
What exactly it means, but it
Bnei
seems
Yisrael
like
HaChassid?
Bnei
What's the
Yisrael
pashut shot of that? Is that one person
in
or
abbreviation. And so Kol Echad Bnei Yisrael Kama his money, it should be part of his time, part of his. It's like more universal. It seems that the Bnei Yisrael was more universal, not just Kol Echad because originally it said. Let me just check this again. The lashon was actually the lashon was Shel HaChosid. It was Shel HaChosid, and the Rebbe put in before between Shel and HaChosid, he wrote Bnei Yisrael, Beis Nun Yud.
so that sounds like the Friedrich Rebbe's original intent with the Hayom Yom, that it would be a universal sefer.
Right. Much we don't find so much, although the Rebbe does use pisgomim in the letters, even to Weltische Yidden pastors. But we don't find so much that they're studim that there should be something hafatzamayonis like everything else hafatzamayonis. You don't find there should be a special stress. Although for Peilush Chassidim this is very ideal, very handy. There were a lot of Chassidim, Peilush Chassidim, they appreciate something that's short. I did hear from one of the teachers in Yeshiva Noletera, one of the Magidi Shurim who I worked with, Rabbi Twersky. His father was a Rebbe in Yerushalayim. He would have the Hayom Yom on the night table, and every day he would look into the Hayom Yom. This was like a word for the day, a short, as the Friedrich Rebbe referred to it, like a Chokli Yisrael or a dosage, or like the Friedrich Rebbe told Rabbi Kazanovsky, this is a mazin ruchni for every day, spiritual nourishment.
Why did who chose the name Hayom Yom?
We see after the Hayom Yom came out, we see what actually the Hayom Yom means by the Friedrich Rebbe. Hayom Yom means that the day is a day. How is it a day? When a person lives with the contents of the lesson of the day. The Rebbe used that also in Yutaskis of Toshem Tes. The Rebbe quotes the Friedrich Rebbe, and the Rebbe says, Kipizgam of the Friedrich Rebbe Hayom Yom, relating to it that the day is a full day when it is when it follows the teachings of the Hayom Yom. Rabbi Chodikov would refer to the Hayom Yom as the vitamin of the day.
In English, the vitamin. Interesting.
It's like it has out. He explains it. He says originally there's Teresh Shabiksav, there's Teresh Shabapeh, and there's a Hamsha. The Rebbe took it all and incorporated it in addition to the Shurei Chitas, and that a person should learn also Niglech Chassidus. This is like a compacted together in one little pill.
Is Hayom Yom, does it start like Kriyash Malamita by mariv, like what, or is it like an after Shacharis type of thing? Is it like when's the
Hayom Yom, the first minhag that the Rebbe brings is Eina Shatz Misatef Betalis Leila Mincha Leila Mariv. That a Chazan does not put on a talis by Mincha Mariv. Some people ask a question: why is it the Rebbe starts with that? One of the answers that Chassidim say, and this is a very interesting point, the Rebbe Bechlal, I received from the Rebbe answers b'negiyah to minhagim, and the Rebbe said if there's a chidush in a minig, it comes first. It appears first in the Pisgam. The Mela, when it comes to Hayom Yom, the first thing, Yutas Kislev, it's a Shabbos, and the Rebbe chooses to write a minik. He writes a minik which is mamish different from all Chassidim. All Chassidim, they put on a talis by Kabbalah Shabbos. Yeah, the only ones that don't do it is Chabad. So in other words, already the Chidush already we ein Shas Misatev. It could also be like al derech, like the Shas begins Meimas Akeirin Nishma Ba'arvis. So could be the Rebbe starts with a minig of talis, mariv, Mincha, and mariv. And actually, there is a letter from the Rebbe that also benegiyah to Mincha. When people wrote to the Rebbe said, no, Mincha, if it'll be a controversy, then then just comply with them. But mariv, the Rebbe said for sure not, because it's mentioned in Svarim that it's a sakona.
So you're implying that, or what did Chassidim have the minhag to read already the Hayom Yom the night before? If the message is the Hayom Yom is the Rebbe is including Pisgamim, it seems like most
people have the minhag. I mean,
some
people are learning shiurim. The shiurim of the day by the daytime. Some behemzich the davening, and that's why after the Rebbe spoke about learning the Hayom Yom every day, they started to call it out after Shachris. Vertelach Shabbos, a person doesn't wait till Motzei Shabbos. It's the day of Shabbos.
Right. So ideally, it should be if the Hayom Yom is giving you directives for the whole day, that starts the night before. No.
It should start the night before, but it starts also in the morning. Is basically, I mean, it's not like sometimes you have in Yonim of Minhagim that you need to know the night before. On the other hand, you have certain Minhagim that are taka the night before, and the Rebbe mentions it the next day, like at a Pesach, B'dikas Chametz. It's very unusual. Usually, it should have been the night before. So there's a certain chazon which I never heard an explanation for that. But in general, I never heard they should be magdim it, unless a person wants to be magdim like chitas, other inyanim that they want to learn before. So they include Hayom Yom. But generally, it's a short inyan, and they manage veistach after davening to observe.
When did it become popular that the Chassidim started learning it every day? Was that something as soon as it was published? This was done, or when did it become so common?
The Hayom Yoms that were published, there were 3 volumes. There's the first volume, which I worked with another younger man, Rabbi Yosef Shagalov. He was doing the references, trying to find the sources for the letters of the Pisgomim, where the Rebbe took it from. I did the part of Chitas. That's when we worked together. The next volume came out in Memdalet in 84. That was what I did on my own. And then Memches. Now people started to realize then that there's something happening here in the Hayom Yom. There were patterns. And some people said, okay, you saw a thing, okay, fine, good. It's the yelled nicht. So some people said, do you figure that the Rebbe had that in mind? So at that point I answered, I said, do you figure that he didn't have it in mind? I mean, prove that he didn't have it in mind, especially when we start seeing a pattern. And after the first volume, I prepared the second volume, and the second.
How did you get into the first volume? What got you?
The first volume basically was that, as mentioned, originally Rabbi Shagalov was working on finding the sources for the Pisgomim. Now, in those years, the Friedrich Rebbe's letters were not published yet, so it was mamish like climbing walls. There was maybe a Pisgom here, a letter here, in the back of the Maimorim and the Sofis. They were in the Sichas, yes. Friedrich Rebbe's Sichas were published at least from the 1940s. So you were able to find. Maimorim were also published, but Igris, which is mamish a big shlal, a bulk of many Pisgomim, we had no access to it. While this was happening, I took an interest. There was something else. I took an interest to figure out why is the Rebbe choosing this Pisgam for that day. It's not a copy and paste. Everything was with logic. And I discovered, the first thing I discovered, which is a major key, as I heard later that the Rebbe told it once to Rabbi Chodikov, that it's chitas. It's the Chumash, the Tilim, and the Tanya. Most obvious, it stands out in the Chumash and the Tanya. The Tilim is every month, so we can see it also maybe at times. But Chumash and Tanya is more direct, and we see it. I mean, I'll just mention a few examples. Mention one example is, now when we're talking about Chumash, we're not talking just only Chumash. We're talking about Rasha, we're talking the Mefarshim of Chumash, we're talking the Chassidish Parsha of Chumash, which is thre and Likkutei. And this is what I'm getting to in regards to the Pisgam of Hey Tevis, 5th of Tevis. Hey Tevis, the Rebbe writes, there's Talmud and there's Maisa. Talmud is studying, and Maisa is deeds. And it says, La'osed Lavei, we will see the uniqueness of the sincere Aveda of a Yid, which is the union of Aveda, Maisa, the union of deed. It'll stand out then the Maila of Maisa over Talmud. When we look at the day of the Parsha, that day is Vayigash, Sunday. Sunday Vayigash, the Chitas is Vayigash. You look in the Chassidish Parsha Tereir, the Alter Rebbe says there's Yehuda and Yosef, there's Maisa and the Talmud. Talmud and Maisa, basically that's Yehuda and Yosef. You'll see it in Tereir, Barichos. And then there's the Maimorim, Rabbi Seligson after, so we see it also occasionally in the Maimorim of the later Rabbeim. It was something which was very obvious, Talmud or Maisa. I mean, today it is also the union of Talmud is that it's Hey Tevis, it's the day of Sfarim. Maybe it's also an union connected with Sfarim, with Limud, which some people figure that out on their own. Now the next one I'm just hopping around is Chof Aleph Tevis, Chof Aleph Tevis. The Rebbe writes that the Frierdiker Rebbe met a water carrier, and he said, when you see a water carrier, you greet water, you should say in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, to mention it briefly, that it is a Siman Bracha. It's a Siman Bracha. Aber bei Gegenwasser soll man sagen, Baal Shem Tov, aber bei Gegenwasser, Baal Shem Tov, Siman Bracha. That day is the day that the daughters of Yisrael met Moshe Rabbeinu, as he was a water carrier, as he drew water for them, Vigam Dole Dole Lona Mayim. And the Rebbe is using the Lashon, Deila Mayim. This is basically the story with the water in that day's Chitas, with Moshe Rabbeinu meeting his Shidduch. So that was...
Derech Agav, I heard, maybe even you mentioned it on one of your groups, that it wasn't observed specifically that the Rebbe would follow, at least verbally, this practice of the Baal Shem Tov, to say that the Baal Shem Tov said it's a Siman Bracha when he would pass over bridges. Is that accurate?
That you mean to say that there was another version?
No. That I was asking, did we see that the Rebbe, when he crossed bridges, when he went here and there,
we don't. I mean, the Rebbe mentioned this story, and actually the background of the story, where they went to draw water. The Rebbe was with the Frierdiker Rebbe together. It was an Erev Shavuos in the early 30s. And the Rebbe mentions the Inyan. The Shaila is today, when the transcribers record the Sichas, the Chazrim, so they actually, copy it exactly as it says in the Hayom Yom. So that's why it's not always we have it, unless we have it on a tape. You can hear how the Rebbe is saying it. But it's basically, they're generally the Rebbe always wanted that they should chazer over, give over, record it in the published Sikha as it is in the Makir, as it is in the source.
Correct. I guess my question is practically: is this the minute? Is the Rebbe and Hayom Yom quoting this story, saying that the minhag Chabad is every time you pass a body of water, you should make this,
no. It became later a minhag Chabad, but I never heard that the Rebbe should imply it, should say it, or
I heard the Rebbe
somewhere
didn't
writing.
specifically do that.
It's a Indian the Chassidim took upon themselves. By Chassidim, there's even more yet. They add, the Rebbe writes, and Hayom Yom Ep, the Friedrich Rebbe, like Doma before that, so they include the Rebbe also, which is interesting, Regesh. But just to go on to another Pisgam, in regards to Chitas, Chavdala Tevis. The Rebbe Marash asked the Tzemach Tzedek, what did the Alter Rebbe want with Chassidus and Chassidim? And Tzemach Tzedek said he wanted that Chassidim shall all be like one family. This inyan of being like one family is something which we find in the Chitas of that day, in the Chumash of Shishi Shmooze. Shishi Shmooze, Vayemer Meisha El Yisrei Chesnei, he told his father-in-law, Elcho Vashuva Mitzrayim, I'm going back to Mitzrayim to see Shlim Acha Yashem Mitzrayim. The welfare, the condition of my brethren in Mitzrayim. He doesn't say brother, brethren, which means all Yidden are like one family. Mela comes the Rebbe, that the Alter Rebbe wanted the Chassidim should be like one family. The Rebbe reflects this concept b'negiat Chassidim alone. So this is what the Rebbe chooses on the day of Chavdala Tevis, where all the inyanim of what he wanted, Chassidim, Chassidus, the inyan of Achdus, the inyan of
Let me ask you a practical question, going back to the Rebbe's Hara and your Mavli for the second version. If the Rebbe felt that the Hayom Yom is a sefer for every Litvak and non-Chassid, how would they read this Hayom Yom? Like, this is a directive for Chassidim about obviously Yisrael.
They would read it that they'll be stas, that in the same sense that you have in the Chitas, you have the inyan of all Yidna like one family. So also as Chassid, as people who join Chassidus, who learn Chassidus, but maybe they connect with Chassidim, they should also feel like they have an inner circle.
Meaning, it seems pretty clear that the Hayom Yom is primarily written for Chassidim. It can have benefits to others as well. Am I getting that? Is that
right? But the Rebbe writes the Lashon Bnei Yisrael. So unless he means Ben Yisrael Chassid, but it's a comma between, so it's like a separate group.
Okay.
Then there is one. I'll just continue with one more. B'negia to Chitas, a very interesting one, which is a background of a Gemara in the Tezvav Sivan. We just had it. In Tezvav Sivan, it says that the Rebbe originally would say short Maimorim, and then later longer, till they developed into Maimorim, which are already in the Torah, in Likkutei. The Chitas of that day is Friday, Yom Shishi of Parshas Baleischa. Baleischa, the Shishi of Baleischa is Vahi ben Sayorin. Vahi ben Sayorin, the Gemara says in Shabbos that it's a sefer for itself. It's a sefer for itself. In the Pisgam, it says about kurza teres, short teres. In the Gemara Shabbos, it says that Pehei Asius, that Vahiben Seir is Pehei Asius, 85 Asius. It speaks to the halacha in halachic terms that if Chas v'Shalom there's a fire and there's a sacred transcript which has 85 letters, a person has to save it. So it says why? Because it is a sefer b'fnei yatzmai. What kind of sefer is it? In Pashat Vertelach, a kurza teira, a short teira. Comes the Rebbe on that day. So that the inyan of a kurza teira. The Alter Rebbe l'chatchila would say kurza teiras.
This podcast is sponsored by Kollel Dach. Revolutionize your limud Chassidus. Join over 200 shluchim and anash that are taking their limud Chassidus to the next level. In Kollel Dach, you have expert mashpiyim, Rabbi Farkash, Rabbi Yosef Klein, Rabbi Yitzchak Coffin, numerous guest mashpiyim that learn Chassidus in a unique way, broken up by sugyas. Every 2-3 months, we take a new sugya and we dissect it from its haskalah to its avodah, level by level, for bringing on the sugya, discussing the avodah aspects of the sugya, the practical application of the sugya, Schedule a conversation today with the Menahel or Paltiel and learn Chassidus like you have never done before. This podcast is sponsored by Kollel lerabonei Chabad. Kollel lerabonei Chabad is a community of experienced rabbonim, aspiring rabbonim, over 100 shluchim and anash from around the world, staying fresh in sugyas of community rabbonos, learning over 8 to 10 hours a week, Gemara, Tur, Beis Yosef, Rosh Kolel, Sgan Rosh Kolel, senior poskim, follow-up, chavrusa placement, to be able to stay fresh in these sugyas and to learn not just shimush and practical psak, but also shimush in the room of rabbonos. The Kolel has so far learned over the past 2 years the sugyas of tvilas kelim and agalas kelim, hilchas nida, and we're soon going to be starting hilchas mikvois. And you can join at any time. Schedule a conversation with the Rosh Kolel today at kollel.chabad.org. That actually gives support for the inyan of the Hayom Yom and Chabad
Right,
Chassidus.
Right. But in addition to that, from another angle, Tezvav Sivan, if we're talking already, in addition to Chitas, there's also the seasons of the year. There are the different seasons in the year. Every 2 months, there's another season. There's the season of Cheref, Kayitz, Cheref, Keir, Vachem, Aviv, stuff, 6 seasons. Every 2 months, there's another season. So when we look at Tezvav Sivan, it is the inyan of Kotzir. It finishes Kotzir. Kotzir is the inyan of cutting the harvest. It starts the first day Pesach. It finishes Tezvav Nisan till Tezvav Sivan. Chetzi Nisan, Iyar, Chetzi Sivan. You look at both days, the Rebbe is speaking about shortening. In the first day Pesach, the Rebbe writes that the Rabbeim the first night would have the Seder Bikitzer, Biktzora. They were Mevayer in Yonim Abagoda in a short version. In other words, they didn't elaborate so much. On the other hand, the second night, they were more barichos. The first night is the Tezvav Nisan begins also the season of Kotzir. Tezvav Sivan ends. The Rebbe also speaks that the Alter Rebbe Lachatchila would say short Maimorim, the union of Tzara. So you have it mitzad the union of the season. And talking already about the season, I will mention another few examples, which is mamish amazing, lahafli poshet, how accurate everything is in its day, or akoponim in that kufa. Tezvav Tishrei begins planting. The planting season Zera is half Tishrei, Cheshvan, and half Kislev. Now, half Tishrei is Sukkot. Right after the Rebbe discusses the basic halachas and minhagim of Sukkot, comes Yutes Tishrei. The Rebbe writes that when we say Veskol Minei Shuasa L'Teva, we should have in mind esrig, wine, v'chulo for the different Yomim Tevin. The harvest should be matzliach, should be successful. This is right after the beginning season of Zera of planting starts. In addition to that, the shyness of that day also speaks about Yokev, wine, v'chulu, all in that season. How does it finish? It finishes half of Kislev. Half of Kislev is Yudalit Kislev. Yudalit Kislev, the Rebbe, the Shabbos before Yutas Kislev, the Rebbe chooses an interesting, very particular, I mean, every Pisgam is interesting, a very particular Pisgam for that day. And it serves it reflects 3-4 aspects that are related to that time. Number one is the Shabbos before Yutas Kislev. The name is Baruchin, everything receives the Ashbah from there. The Rebbe chooses a Sikha from Teira Sholim, which he speaks about the 4 terms, Tzadik Tomim, Yosha Chosid. Tzadik, a righteous place, a Tom, a righteous person, a sincere person, a straightforward person, and a Chosid. And Chosid, he gives a few Pirushim. So this is the Shabbos before Yutas Kislev, the union of Chosid. And Taka, right after that, or at least the last few days of the Hayom Yom, the Rebbe sums up the Hayom Yom and speaks about Chassidus Chabad and what it accomplishes in the person, and that the aim is, as he finishes the Hayom Yom, I don't want you Gan Eden, I don't want you Ilam Haba, I want only you alone. the essence alone, the Eibishter himself. The second inyan that is in this Pisgam, the inyan of Chassid, one of the inyanim is Ezu Chassid Shemes Chassidim Kandelei. That his inyan is he wants to make a dira betachtenim. Liyachet kutsha berichu shchintei. That is in the Pisgam of Yudalat Kislev. Liyachet kutsha berichu shchintei is mentioned, explained, elaborated in many Maimorim of the Rabbeim. There's the inyan of Chassan V'Kala. And that's the Chassan date of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin. So this is where the Rebbe's Mavliya, Kavyochel, includes it.
Let me go back to the criticism you were getting from some Chassidim. Did you get validation?
Let me finish this. Let's talk
sorry.
first about this thing. I want to finish this thing because here we see the end of Zera. What we see the end of Zera is that Zera means planting. So the Rebbe chooses this Pisgam, but this Pisgam also speaks about Zera. When he speaks about Tomim, the Rebbe says Tomim means one. Shetam eitze upirye shovim, that the taste of the tree and the fruit is the same taste. This is the day that the season of Zera is complete. So comes the Rebbe and chooses a Pisgam which relates to Yutas Kislev, relates to Yudalat Kislev, and reflects the end of the season of Zera. Relates to that also, and then the Rebbe continues after that into new inyanim. When it comes, for example, talking about season, when it comes to it becomes Tezayin Shvat, it becomes cold. The Rebbe writes between coldness and kfira and denial of Hashem, there's a thin wall. So it is that day is the chitas of Amalek, but together with that, it's also Tezayin Shvat. It's the inyan of the cold season. So we see, Posher, how these inyanim are all included. I just want to conclude with the topic of Zera, a very amazing inyan. In the Hayom Yom in Tishrei I just mentioned, in the 19th, the Rebbe writes about the Skol Minei Suasa L'Teva. Skol Minei Suasa L'Teva. Now, when you look in Gemara, the Gemara in Bechira says, how long does it take for a tree to grow, a wine tree, a vine? So it says, how long does it take? No, it's Cheshvan Kislev Teva Shvat Oder, 5 months. You look at Yud Ches Oder, the Rebbe writes, when a person is eating from the Zayim Minim and drinking wine, how should he say the Bracha Achrina? Which means 5 months after you test Tishrei, he's speaking about the inyan of drinking wine. And this is when the wine was produced, final. It's lahafli. It's like, I mean, now when we're talking about chitas is basically not only chitas. I have from Eir HaChaim. I have from Ramban sometimes. I have the Zayar quite often. Teirei Likkutei is quite often. I would say Teirei Likkutei every week there's something that the Rebbe mentions something which is reflected in the Teirei or Likkutei Maimer. For example, I'll just bring one example. In the 28th of Tammuz, the Rebbe writes that there are Maimorim that the Rabbeim said to refine the atmosphere, to purify the air. So yes, you have it, the Maimer is Likkutei Heichotzu, dacht mir. It mentions also the Alter Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, Matei Halacha, the different Maimorim. So Heichotzu is in that week's parsha, Matas Masai, Likkutei. But there's something more, there's something additional here. The additional thing is, L'tayir Aver Ha'olam, the Alter Rebbe speaks in Likkutei there, that the Aver Ha'olam Chutz La'aretz is Avira Tamei, Vigusha Tamei, that Chutz La'aretz is different than Eretz Yisrael. Comes the Rebbe and says that Rabbeim had a mission to they also to purify the air, which means b'yachas to what the Alter Rebbe says. Wow. In addition to that, which is a separate thing, and that's when you get to the age, how the Hayom Yom is divided by the 70 years, which I'll speak about it further. I don't want to confuse. It's all so. That's basically the thing.
Now, Rebbe, validate that what you were going down the right path.
I'll tell you what went on when it came to the Rambam. When I started to reflect on, and this is before the 83 halachas. When it came to the Rambam, the 83 halachas, not before the three prokim. It's before the three prokim of Rambam a day. This was 2 years earlier. It was in Mem Beis after the first volume of Hayom Yom commentaries was published. So I started with Rambam. What got me to think about Rambam was very simple. The Rebbe verbringt, and it was Chavdala Tevis. And the Rebbe mentioned that we see that the Rambam begins with Yud Kei Vav Kei. The abbreviation is Yud Kei Vav Kei. And the Rebbe also begins with Yehuda ben Tema. Yehuda Shem Avaya. The Mela, by me, everything was Hayom Yom. So I start to look at Hayom Yom. And I see what the Rebbe Rashab wrote and how the Rebbe took out words. So the Rebbe writes in the letter, the Rebbe quotes from the letter, Yutas Kislev, Hachag Asher Podav V'Shalom Nafshenu, V'er V'Chayes Nafshenu Nitalonu, Hayom Azeh Rish Hashanah L'Dach. So he says, Yutas Kislev, the first thing is Yud. Then there's Hachag Asher Podav V'Shalom Nafshenu. They're phrases. Then there is Ve'er V'Chayis Nafshenu Nitalon is the Vav, and then there's Hayom Azeh Rish Hashanah L'Dach. That's Yud Kei Vav Kei. Wow. Actually, when I wrote that into the Rebbe, this was the second. This was, I think, in the second volume. I wrote when generally before I published a new sefer, I would send in the whole thing to the Rebbe and the parperois, which were like the Remazim Gematriois, which the Rebbe looked at through separately. And was Magia, and of course the Rebbe's the biography of the Rabbeim in the beginning, the communal work activities. So that was also seen by the Rebbe in detail. Now, when
you wrote the Mavoi of the biography,
the Mavoi biography, the first one was done personally by Rabbi Shagalov from 1957 to 1981, late 81. Mem Beis Kislev. Then when I published the next one, I updated from 82 from Mem Beis to Mem Dalet, and then Mem Ches. I updated the Rebbe's biography to Mem Ches.
The Rebbe edited your timeline.
So basically, it was, I would say, Pash's most authentic biography because the Rebbe himself edited. He took out what he didn't want. He put in. He added. He omitted. He
tell us a few things of what the Rebbe took out in relation to the biography.
I mean, there is one thing that the Rebbe took out which remained memory because it was something that somebody told me, put it in, and let's see the Rebbe's reaction. We know that the Rebbe did not want it on a previous occasion when something else was published, maybe in Eretz Yisrael. It was Benegea to Shichon Chabad in Lud. It was something in Lud that year, a certain institute, a certain meset. So when the Rebbe saw it, the Rebbe crossed it out. Now, talking about something that the Rebbe edited, amongst the different things, one of them was that the Rebbe comes out with Mir Yehudi. The initiative of Mir Yehudi was in 1970, Tavshin Lamed, Purim. By the Fabrengen, the first time. So when it said over there that the Rebbe begins the struggle with Mir Yehudi, the Rebbe wrote two words, Gam Begolui. That also in an obvious way, because there was a lot going on in correspondence, even with Ben Gurion. There were things happening in the earlier years. So the Rebbe really polished everything should be exactly as is. When it came to the sefer Klolium, the Rebbe wrote the whole arichos. Every community has their nusach, has the yukim, mesera. So the Rebbe also elaborated a lot there. And the famous one was Tavshin Mem Beis, when the Rebbe wrote about Tiyash Nas Bias Mashiach. The Rebbe took after, it was the 11th of Kislev, Tavshin Mem Beis. So everything was updated till there. Then the Rebbe took a carbon paper, used to be called a skim paper, so a carbon paper. The Rebbe started to continue writing his biography. He wrote that it's Hafotzes Hamayonis Chutza, this Yutas Kislev, Chanukah, Mivtza Chanukah, and then the Rebbe wrote the Sefer Kloli, V'yesh V'asher. In many places, it says that Tov Shem Mem Beis Rosh Hashanah Tiyesh Nas Bias Mashiach. So that really electrified the whole world. Chassidim, the Rebbe is writing Rosh Hashanah for a year. There was the Shmeinim Shana. And from then on, the Rebbe gave an abbreviation for every year besides 1 year. So, this is nature.
Did you popularize the Hayom Yom? Like, from what age did like Chassidim start carrying a Hayom Yom in their tefillin bag? Was that already in the chofs, or was that
I don't know.
Men's?
Okay, I mean, to be honest,
or in the samachs.
I don't remember that younger bacharim or even Anash would look at the Hayom Yom on a steady basis. I don't remember such a thing.
When did that start?
It was a luach, and the people had no idea what it is. I mean, they had an idea what it is, but it's like it wasn't like a Shir Tanya, the chitas of the day. When the Rebbe spoke about it, Memtes, that they should learn it every day, this really pitched in for it. In addition to people buying the Hayom Yom, the commentaries, and I mean, all in all, it was very special that the Yutas Kislev Memtes was really the polish,
But until the late 80s, it wasn't like a daily thing for most Chassidim.
It depends, because some minyanim already in the beginning of the nuns, they would already announce it. I think even by the Rebbe's minyan, before the Rebbe left, they would announce. I mean, the Gabbai in 770, Rabbi Shia Pinson, others, and then later probably other Chabad houses picked up. In
front of the Rebbe, they would announce the Hayom Yom after davening.
I'm not sure. I have to check. But I know that Rabbi Pinson immediately right after that Memtes, he would read it, and later Amir Blau continued with it.
When did it become a thing that people associated a Hayom Yom with their birthday as being significant? Did the Rebbe ever mention
it? It was more with Mashpiyim. I know Rabbi Friedman would tell people, you want to know your Aveda, you look at your Meledas. And also other mashpiyim Pashit were probably pitching it, and it's something that's it's lahafli, because many times people Pashit see their nature in
what's Rabbi Seligson's Hayom Yom? Could you share your personal connection?
My Hayom Yom is Chafei Tevis.
Well, what's Chafei
Tevis is being in world but higher than world.
You see that as a connection to your personal avodah?
I try.
My birthday's Tisha B'Av, so it's about the shiurim for Tisha B'Av. Anyway.
All right. Gula. I mean, the Rebbe says after Chatzos is already Gula. It's the Rebbe says we say Nachem, Gansin Yonim.
So would you say that maybe you were responsible for popularizing Hayom Yom? Like here that Rebbe wrote a sefer, he spent this half a year working on a sefer, and it was a closed book until 50 years later.
No, basically, I mean, people got to know it. It was in the Oris of the yeshivas, in one Ha'oris that I kept on writing in the Keftzim. So it really got around, and it was very. It was getting around. Lemaisa, did people start learning Hayom Yom from that? I don't know, but. It started to come out in English, so some people started to learn it also because it was accessible. People that didn't have a background in Yiddish. Actually, Benegea to the Chitas, when I saw there's already a whole bunch of days which are connected with the Chitas, so the Rebbe wrote then that Kiposhut, if there is enough pages, I should publish it. This was the beginning of the work, before even a full year of work. And the Rebbe said, "There's enough mispar amudim I should print it. Mispar amudim maspik or something. I should already publish it. But I wanted to go through the whole Chumash. When I went through the Chumash, I saw that it really was a major key, and that's when the first volume. Basically, the first volume is that, and the Menhagim, as they are mentioned in Sefer Menhagim, Rabbi Shagalov took care of that. But basically, it was the Chitas that was.
Do you feel that you've just cracked the surface, or we've kind of pretty much got the Rebbe's Iker Kavanas of the Hayom Yoms that are Muslim down, or do you feel there's a lot more work to do?
Okay, this was the first volume. I did 3 volumes, and then there's another 30 years after that. So
What about the 30 years after that? You're
the
still
30 years after that was also, I mean, it was strengthening and filling in and polishing of what I did till now, and seeing how these different concepts are really holding water. It's like I can see that it can see it's consistent. Like when I had a certain example, and others held that what are you collecting too? Who says it has a dust? But I spoke to Rabbi Yokan, and he said to me, if you see something is consistent, don't stop for anything, and just continue. The hemshech to what we mentioned earlier in regards to the various patterns in Hayom Yom, the chitas, the seasons, as mentioned earlier, a thought came to mind based on a sicha of the Rebbe. The Rebbe spoke in a sicha on the 10th of Kislev Tavshin Memches, late 1987, that every year in a person's life reflects the life cycle of a person. Because every year is a complete year with all the seasons. The next year is a repetition, as it's mentioned in the commentaries on Chumash, etc. That Shana is also from the word Shana v'chazar, repeating, a repetition. And therefore, every year has in itself all the seasons, all the different things that take place through the year, and the next year is a repetition. This brought me to think that, let's check in the Hayom Yom. Divide the 383 days of the Luach, it's a leap year, by 70. 70 is the Shleimus, the basic life of the person. Yemei Shnei Sheinu B'hem Shivim Shana, as David HaMelech says, as is mentioned in Chassidus, in Kabbalah, and in Chazal, the uniqueness of number 70. The result is that every 5-6 days in the Luach is 1 year in a person's life. We begin looking in the Hayom Yom, the first month from Yutas Kislev to Yud Ches Teves. The Rebbe mentions basic inyanim in Avedas Hashem, as a child is raised with emunah, with tmimus, sincerity in Avedas Hashem, and how a person could awaken their heart, etc. This is all in that month from Yutas Kislev to Yud Ches Teves. Yud Ches Teves, the Rebbe relates a story that the Tzemach Tzedek, when he was a child, he learned the pasuk Vaychi Yanke Beres Mitzrayim, learning by his teacher, and the Rebbe mentions what the teacher said and what the Alter Rebbe explained and taught the Tzemach Tzedek. This is Ben Chomish Lemikra, Vaychi Yanke Beres Mitzrayim. That's Chumash. By 5 years old, Chumash. Then comes the Rebbe, and the next day you test Teves, and mentions that the Alter Rebbe made it hakona to learn Chumash and Rashi every day, on a daily basis. And the Rebbe concludes this was the custom of the Rabbeim Nisiyei Chassidei Chabad. Chumash and Rashi, the Chumash Lemikra, already begins. A few days later, we're already in the slot of 6 years old. One of the days is Chav Beis Teves. The Rebbe mentions that in the same sense that there is a obligation to put on tefillin every day, there is also the obligation to think about the chinuch of the children every day. Chinuch begins, as our Chazal tell us, from 6 years old, the Bar Shis. We go on further. We come to, I'm just going to mention a few examples, coming to 9 years old. The Rebbe mentions in that slot on Zayin Shvat, which is one of the days in the age of 9, that the Alter Rebbe was very well versed in astronomy. When he was 9 years old, he was already learning astronomy, and by 10 years old, he already made a calendar based on the calculations of his knowledge in astronomy. And by 12 years old, he taught Barabim in public. He gave a shiur on Hilchas Kiddush HaChedesh, which is based on astronomy. Here we see two things. We see Hilchas Kiddush HaChedesh. Zayin Shvat is the day which the shiur Chumash is HaChedesh Hazeh Lachem, which is setting up months, which is, as the Rambam explains it in length in Hilchas Kiddush HaChedesh. But in addition to that, it says that the Alter Rebbe, 9 years old, already knew Chochmas HaHandosa VaTchuna. And this is exactly the age that they are in the calendar by 9 years old. As we go on further, when it comes to 12 years old, which is a group of days that also include Chof Zayin Shvat, the Rebbe brings an interesting quote from the Rebbe Rashab, and the quote is a very basic inyan Avedas Hashem, and it's from the Rebbe Rashab's Maimer, a discourse, that earlier Chassidim made a resolution in their soul, that everything that is permitted, although it is permitted, but if he has a will and a desire for it, he shouldn't do it. And through this, he will break the desire of the evil inclination. The union of Taiva, the breaking the desire of Taivas. This relates to a 12-year-old. How does it relate to a 12-year-old? The Rambam writes, and it's known in Chazal, that one thing that a 12-year-old could do, and our Chachomim take that in consideration, is the union of a neder, a vow. Mufla samach loish, as it's mentioned in Hilchas Nedarim from the Rambam, which we just learned. What is the purpose of a vow? A vow is that although he's permitted to use it as long as he is permitted to eat it, but he makes a vow that he refrains himself from it. That is basically what a vow is. So the Rebbe, on the slat of 12 years old, brings this vart, which reflects the inyan of a neder which a 12-year-old could do. When it comes to 13 years old, which is the beginning of the first order, the Rebbe mentions the inyan of ingraining in oneself midas tevis, which this is basically the aveda of a bar mitzvah, being mature, meichen de gadlus. So Mela also then, he also has a grip on his midas, on his personal character traits. As the years move on, ben chamesh esrei Gemara, by 15 years old, we see the Rebbe makes references in some of the quotes to Gemara. Middle of Adar Aleph, actually almost by the mark of 20 days in Adar Aleph, the Rebbe makes a reference to a Gemara. He's dealing now with a child who's already learning Gemara. Ben chamesh esrei Gemara. By 20 years old, which is the 12th of Adar Sheni, the Rebbe speaks about Parnasa. Since 20 years old already, the person is up to Parnasa. Especially gets married. Ben Shmeina Esrei L'chupa. So B'meila by 20 already, after learning a few years, as the Alter Rebbe writes in Hilchas Talmud Torah, so then he goes out the Parnasa. By 40 years old, on the 19th of Sivan, the Rebbe mentions that there was a shiur that the Tzemach Tzedek had with the Rebbe Marash. They had a shiur in Kabbalah with Biuri Chassidus. And this is 40, as it's mentioned in Halacha, that by 40 years old, a person is permitted to start learning Kabbalah. And it's interesting to note that in the next month, the Rebbe begins citing sources which they're citing quotes which their source basically in Kabbalah. Either it is the, for example, the Rish Chedesh, the beginning of Tammuz. The Rebbe mentions the union of V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha, which is a takon of the Arizal to say before davening. And you have Zayin Tammuz, notes Chilosan B'Seifon, that there is, which is basically from Sefer Yetzirah. And then you have Yudala Tammuz. The Rebbe brings an explanation from Eitz Chaim. And then there is Yudzayin Tammuz from Pri Eitz Chaim. Basically referring to inyanim of Kabbalah, dealing with someone who is already at the age of learning Kabbalah. And then we go on from there to one who is actually 53 years old. The Rebbe mentions the inyan of Gan, b'negia to b'negia to their age. Speaking also about the Hemshech Hayim Beis, which the Rebbe Rashab was 52, 53 years old when he, in the time that he was saying the Hemshech Hayim Beis, he was their age. And the Rebbe mentions then a story of the Hemshech Hayim Beis. By 60 years old, which is the second day Sukkot, some actually Chalamet Sukkot, the Rebbe brings the connection that a neshama has with the Eibishter, which is basically to negate to negate a negative aspect that can happen when a person reaches 60, since there's a inyan of Kodesh, v'chulu, God forbid, if a person did something wrong in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, it was a person could have been punished. What is the inyan of Kodesh? Disconnecting from Hashem. And here it is, the Rebbe says, Fakert, brings out the positive inyan that a person is always connected with Hashem. Finally, when a person gets to 65, the Rebbe writes a pisgam that a person came down in this world to accomplish and feel a delight and connect with godliness, with Elikus. And the Rebbe concludes with a question: now, what are you waiting for? The person is then at the age of 65. And finally, when it comes to 70, Yudches Kislev, the Rebbe concludes the Luach that the Alter Rebbe said, I don't want your Gan Eden, I don't want your Elam Haba, I want only you alone. Which this is the Shleimus of the Aveda of 70 years old.
Wow. Okay. Grayson Yeshakayach for giving us a small window into this.
It is a small window.
Okay. We should hear Besuris Tavis for the Yidden.
Amen. Amen.
And this discussion should only bring Schusim.
Amen.
Kol Tov.
Amen. Sei gesund, Hatzlacha Rabbe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This podcast is sponsored by Smichas Chaver Chabad, HalachaU, and Women's Halacha Circle. In over 100 communities around the world, Halacha for everyone. Halacha curriculum that we provide for your community to teach the halachas, to engage people in halacha, to make halacha interesting. We have Smichas Chaver Chabad for Anash communities. For those that have a yeshiva background, we have HalachaU, which are advanced courses being taught in Chabad houses around the world. For those that don't have a yeshiva background but want serious, roll up your sleeve learning, super engaging, take them through the journey of the halacha down to the super, super practical. Every 6 months is a new topic. After Pesach, we are starting the sugya of workplace halachas, the laws of ribis, the laws of baltolin, paying your workers on time, and the laws of yichud. Fascinating sugyas. We have it on various levels for those that have a yeshiva background, those that don't have a yeshiva background, for women as well. Check out SCP-Chabad.org or HalachaU.org. Click join to schedule a meeting with me to learn more. This podcast is sponsored by Kollel Aliba de Hilchasa, a brand new Kollel with the Rosh Kollel, Rav Yaakov Goldstein, Sgan Rosh Kollel, Rav Menachem Rottenberg, Menahel Poyel, Rav Mendel Weisfish, all active, experienced Moed HaHira. follows an 8-year syllabus. Every 6 months is a new topic, broken up into subtopics. Until Pesach, we're learning the halachas of Hilchas Avelus and Bikur Cholim. After Pesach, we're learning workplace halacha, Hilchas Ribis, Hilchas Baltolin, and Hilchas Yichud. It's a serious learning Gemara, Shulchan Aruch inside. 3 hours a week of chavrusa learning. Help find you a chavrusa, set up a chavrusa. And then there's 2 in-depth shiurim per week, 2 live shiurim per week. And it's serious learning. Someone that has a busy schedule, 3 to 5 hours a week. Schedule a conversation with the Menahel today at KollelAD.com.
If you've reached this part of the video, you probably enjoyed it. Please consider donating a video or many videos to help us continue doing these amazing interviews. Or you may do it in honor of someone, in memory of someone. It's all good. Hope you enjoyed and see you in the next video.